Welcome to Inside Tacoma. I'm Elisa O'Hanlon. Today, my guest is City Council Member Robert Thoms of District 2. Hi, Robert. How you doing?
Not bad. Good morning.
Good. I'm glad you're here. I should say Councilmember Thoms, but I hope you feel comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
All right. All right. So, how are things in District 2 these days? How
Good.
long have you been our council member?
Well, I'm an odd one in that I was appointed when Jake Fye went to the legislature, now our transportation chairman in the House of Representatives. So I did the last bit of his term, and then I served a 4-year term, got reelected 2 years ago for a 4-year term. So I'm in the middle part of that last term. So I will have about 2 years and a couple months left on the council.
2 years and a couple. Who's counting?
My kids are.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. So you represent North Tacoma, Port of Tacoma area, Northeast Tacoma.
Yep.
What do you think are some of what's on folks' minds? What do they tell you these days that's on their minds in those different neighborhoods?
Well, as you can imagine, just like our city's a growing city, it's a thriving community. So it ranges from mundane stuff like speed bumps to when's the garbage being picked up, the recycling changes we're making, all the way to sort of heady stuff like how might we incentivize greater investment? What are these opportunity zones we hear about? What's going on with the sub-area planning of the port? So it ranges. I mean, it really just depends on who you talk to. I feel blessed because I represent the heart of our region, really, right? And so when I talk to our colleagues at the county level and the state level, I talk about things that I think aren't necessarily just for Tacoma, but the fact that we're the heart of the South Sound, the heart of Pierce County, benefits all parts of our city, not just District 2, but the entirety of our city. So I'm blessed in my mind to represent the heart of our community, and it's a great job to have, and I'm really eager to continue doing it and love all the partnerships that I've been able to forge forward. Really, my stick in government's been just good government, effective government, government that inspires you to want to get more involved, that can get things done and be the right partner. And if that's what public servants can do to their constituents, I think that should be like their number one goal, is to make people feel comfortable and confident in government.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons that I too serve in government.
Yep.
I share that value. When you talk about being able to serve the heart of the Puget Sound area, one of the ways that you do that, I know you are on one of the committees of the Puget Sound Regional Council.
Yes.
Yeah. Will you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, for those who don't know the Puget Sound Regional Council, it's basically 4 counties: Kitsap, Snohomish, King, and Pierce. And what it does is it sends elected officials from those 4 counties to work together collectively on larger regional issues, be it transit, be it environmental issues, be it economic development. In the capacity that I serve as Economic Development Chair of the City of Tacoma, I serve on the Economic Development Committee. I'm also an alternate for the mayor on the executive committee of that. And over the totality of the PSRC, it's just basically an opportunity for you to go bring your issues that are specific to your community and sort of align that with larger sums of resources that are coming for those said things. The biggest one probably is transportation.
Yeah.
I mean, because the challenges that befall King County can't be solved in King County. They're going to be solved by greater collaboration with Pierce County and Snohomish County, making sure that we're moving people to and from their home or work in a more effective manner.
Yeah. Well, and the Puget Sound Regional Council serves as where a lot of federal dollars are invested.
Yep.
And so then you all work at how are we going to
try to
disperse?
divvy it up. Yep, that's right.
So
It's been effective. I would say we in the Puget Sound should be very proud of the effort of the Regional Council. I think it's in its many years I've worked in various iterations of government that I've been in, and it's an effective tool. It's working well. I think our federal partners feel very comfortable in having that as a vetting tool for resources that come here. So I think we get our better than fair share through the Regional Council.
Yeah. Well, I think there's always a fairer share.
Well, I'd say the Puget Sound Regional Council, just opposed to other regional councils, does very well. It is up to us in Pierce County to go fight for more money to come south versus other places. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because what is the statistic that we still have? I know it's a majority of our folks that live in Pierce County commute out of the county for jobs.
Yeah.
So reversing that balance, or actually creating a balance, is one of the priorities we still need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm convinced, and I've said this to my colleagues on the Seattle City Council and those who work in King County, I would argue the challenges that the largest challenges facing Seattle cannot be solved by Seattle. We are going to have greater regional job growth.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be in one specific city. Now I get for those, especially in the people that are just coming into the workforce, those who are let's say 20 to 35, they desire places that have they desire world-class cities. And I would argue that we're fortunate to have what I consider to be one of the best cities in the United States, and certainly a world-class city that's our neighbor to the north. What I would like to do, and what I try to do here on the Tacoma City Council, is bring the type of amenities and desirable activities and the types of facets of a community that workforce wants. So you don't have to choose to necessarily be in Seattle, but you can work and live here in Tacoma.
Yeah.
And so it's different, and it takes time to build that type of infrastructure, right? And I think for those who've paid attention to our economy over the last, say, 15 or so years, I think one could argue, and I think it's absolutely true, we have brought on the type of amenities, be it Point Ruston, be it the downtown restaurants, be it UW-T and what's thriving on that part of Pacific, or come down to the other end and Wood City Grill and all those type of things. It's working. We're starting to get the type of density, the type of amenities that people want, desire, and demand out of a community. And so that's a good thing.
Yeah. So I know one of the things that you're very interested is in working with businesses who want to invest in Tacoma. Can you talk a little bit about who you've been working with and what you're excited to see?
Well, I mean, because I like, to go out and eat and take in our great, atmosphere that we have, and just the beauty of our waterfront city. We're next to a wonderful mountain. I've been working quite a bit on the Sidewalk Cafe stuff with businesses trying to expand that. Several years ago, I worked with a local business close to where you live, actually, who was having a dickens of a time getting a sidewalk permit. And so we decided to endeavor to really have a Sidewalk Cafe policy and sort of accentuate the opportunity to go outside in the months that lend itself to that. So that was 4.5 years ago, and now with McMenamins coming on, we created a pilot project that I was spearheading to expand it. And so at McMenamins, over the months that they were open, until I think those chairs are still out there, but I think they're probably on the back end.
I live just up the hill. I can roll down the hill, so yes, I've enjoyed their chairs outside.
But if you talk to the McMenamin brothers, I mean that cafe on the Spanish Steps has 60 some odd seats, and they've seen a tremendous amount of activity out there. So for them, if you think about it, 60 seats, numerous tabletops, that is as big as some of our entire restaurants in other parts of the city. So really my stick is, again, going back to work with businesses and those who want to invest in our community and say, what are the barriers to that? I mean, and it changes. Some people it's financing, some people it's land, some people it's regulations. But how do we make you excited and eager to spend as much of your money in our community as possible, creating the type of things that our citizens deserve and want? Absolutely. And so it's onesie twosies, working with E9 with their expansion, with their new brewery down in the brewery district, complementing the other breweries out of there. So I love it. I mean, and we have a lot of institutional investors here, family businesses like, E9 and others. And so keep it coming.
Yeah. Is there something specific like the Sidewalk Cafe work that businesses have been telling you that they would like to see a pilot project on?
Well, that one specifically, it was just the fact that it was on a public right-of-way, which we had not done before, and the size of it.
Yeah.
We'd sort of been limited to smaller ones. But absolutely, I've had a couple of other ones in the Dome District asked to do it, so they could provide greater opportunities for those who would go to concerts and different events at the Tacoma Dome. So absolutely, the Sidewalk Cafe was definitely driven by business. Originally, it was just one business, and we did it, for that, and then over the period of the first year and a half, I believe we had a 450% increase in people seeking permits.
Oh, wow.
Because we were basically just saying, we want you to do it if that's what you want to do.
Okay.
Prior to that, we were sort of, I would argue, sort of from a regulatory perspective, sort of, well, we're not sure, how do you do it? We got to work with the Liquor Control Board and this, that, and the other. But I convened a couple of meetings with them to come to our city and say, how would we do it? And now there's businesses up and down 6th Avenue that want to do it. Places that, traditionally had no interest in it, but now do, like Shakopee.
Yeah.
They're one of the people we're working on now, and there's another business down in the Dome District that I hope to have a permit for here in the coming weeks.
Great. So kind of once we got through all that red tape of all those regulations and health department and how do you make it happen, and a 450% increase in permitting, we've got something rolling now. I know another group that you have recently convened is the Transit Oriented Development Advisory Group in the Tacoma Dome. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Well, that one's a good group of folks. It was sort of born of the Dome Business District, who had some concerns. It started back with Amtrak. When Amtrak was building their station here, people were worried about how it was going to come through our city. And I think that's a fair question. It's a fair question for Sound Transit as we look to do the extension down here. Meaning, and I struggle with this because I want to be respectful of our transit partners, but they're cutting through the heart of our city. We're not cutting through the heart of their organization. So, for better or worse, they're going to have to meet the needs and sensibilities of Tacoma. Not Tacoma's going to meet the needs and sensibilities of the transit agency. And so, when you're talking, and you work with them as well, these are large agencies that are used to just, putting down their stuff, and we hope that works out for you. And we have an opportunity, in my opinion, to change the entire, if not understanding of Tacoma, but certainly showcase our city in a way that heretofore we've not been able to do. And by having a major transit hub here, when we put Sound Transit in here, which is less than a decade away from being in fruition. So
I like how you make that sound like it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Less than a decade. I like that.
It's right on the cusp of that. Right? In theory, it could be as late as 2032, as early as 2028, as I understand it. So I think we keep pushing. And who's to say what's happening in someone's garage today with some creative group of teenagers who are going to come up with a way to do things faster and better than we do it. So I'm optimistic. And I know people want it. But the TOD advisory group was a way to harness sort of the excitement and the concern that people had when we were doing Amtrak, and say, how do we continue to evolve our Dome District and our TOD transit-oriented development areas of our city? It isn't just the Dome. That just happens to be where the stations all sort of coalesce.
And right now, that's where the energy is.
Because that's where you got Amtrak's coming through. Pierce Transit's got its hub there. We're going to have the Sound Transit coming there and linking to the link. And so it allows, in my opinion, and my hope is, it's still new, we've only done a couple meetings, is that we will use that as a fulcrum, if you will, to inform said transit agencies, be it Pierce Transit, be it Amtrak, be it WashDOT, be it Sound Transit. Here's what we want in connection with your investment in here. It could be sidewalks, it could be crosswalks, it could be lighting, it could be greater security. Those are the type of things we're hearing now. Because again, I would argue that is the front door to our community. And if it doesn't,
district.
If it doesn't look good there, you wonder who's going to step off the train. So it's coming upon us and those who want to come through our great city, that we're going to make it look wonderful when you come there, and you're going to be like, why haven't I come here before?
Right. Well, and a lot of people do come to the Tacoma Dome for events,
for concerts,
and so
make it super slick. Come from Seattle, take a train, relax. It'll be just like us going up to, a UW game or taking the Sounder up for work.
Absolutely. So the Tacoma Dome District is in your district, and you work a lot with the business owners in that district. They put in a lot of hours.
They are. It's a part of our city that's dynamic because of the transit investments going on, and it's it's right on the cusp of our interface with the tribes. It's also, we have our stabilization site down there. You're right on the freight corridor. So it has always been an area that was right on the very tip of change. And so they're very vocal. They're committed. They were invested here when the rest of the city wasn't doing as much down there. So I have a great deal of respect for those who've decided to hang their hat on making our Dome District a great place for everyone. And so now it's their turn to shine, because they are now going to be the gateway for tens of thousands of people. By Sound Transit's estimates, we're going to have somewhere in the range of 20 to 30,000 people a day riding the train there. Once we have it hooked up to the spine. So to me, as you said about people leaving Pierce County to go to King County, that should be a focus for myself for the next 2 years, and those who will precede me going forward, is how do we make sure that the 30 to 40,000 people that see fit to have to drive right through our city to go north have a reason to stay here and or take the train or the light rail.
Yeah, yeah. And we see the development starting to happen.
Absolutely.
More so in the Tacoma Dome. It's just maintaining that momentum.
It's coming along. I mean, it takes time.
Yeah.
And we're not hardly a decade from a significant recession. I mean, if not the greatest recession we had, at least in our lifetime, certainly. And so to think that would change on a dime obviously would have been a little, naive at one level. But now that we've got the brisk economy moving, I think we have to double down on some of our economic policies and expand some of them.
Yeah.
Be it the opportunity zones, looking at some of the tax credits that we've employed over the last number of years. I remember the first place I lived here in town was the Harmon building. Oh. And I think they were one of our first groups to take advantage of the tax abatement.
Yep.
And refurbish the building there. And I remember I wanted to buy that, but it had a 10-year time frame that you couldn't buy it because they had used the tax credit at the time, the tax abatement. And so I know, and I think the history proves that these programs and policies work to incentivize investments in parts of your community that otherwise wouldn't be invested in. So I think we need to expand them. I'm looking forward to working with our state legislature. We're fortunate to have the new Speaker of the House from the 27th here in Tacoma. So I think the opportunities are great to do more economic expansion here in Tacoma.
Absolutely. I want to touch on something you mentioned in the Tacoma Dome about it being where the stabilization site is, and talk about. I'm not sure everyone knows what the stabilization site is, and I know it's a challenge, but. As well as the excitement that's in Tacoma, we have challenges too.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the stabilization site, as you know, was several years ago. We had a congregation of folks who were sleeping underneath the, WashDOT interstate, the 705. And it was constantly causing consternation with long-standing companies in our community, Brown and Haley, some of the different companies that are down right there along. And it really, in my opinion, created sort of this foreboding feeling at that part of our city. Not that it doesn't have its challenges now, as we're still grappling with homelessness and why people find themselves living on the streets of our city. So we worked with WashDOT to clear that encampment out because there were fires down there and the like. And so in doing so, Tacoma, to our credit, and really I don't even think it was any of the politicians that decided this. This was staff saying, we understand you guys have a concern. We're going to try to build something that we think meets your concerns, and that became the stabilization site. So we were into it for 2.5 years now, I believe, that it's been formally a stabilization site. And the goal of the stabilization site is to say, for those who find themselves living on the streets for one reason or another, we're going to take you to a place, and right now it's roughly about 90 spots that we have. Figure out who you are, why you find yourself in this situation, and we're going to avail you of the programs that are there to help stabilize you. Yeah. The challenge is we have far more than 90 people, obviously. Yeah. And frankly, we need to do a better job of calling into the field of battle, if you will, on this, our partners in it. Because really, mental health dollars, some of these dollars that follow these types of people who are find themselves in a situation are not city in nature. They may not even be county in nature. Sure. But they certainly do have federal and state programs that deal with this. And I suspect the sooner we get to doing a better job of it, the better for the people that find themselves in this situation, and certainly for the citizens who are now asking other agencies like parks and schools, why is this happening in our schoolyards? Why are people sleeping in our parks? Because I would argue there's been a breakdown of the governmental programs and processes and collaboration necessary to put our hands around it. And it isn't a city's job, but the mayor and I recently were at a meeting together, and I've been doing government in one form or fashion for over 20 years, be it as a Navy officer, working with Senator Cantwell, working down in Olympia, and now here on the council for 8.5 years. And you know what? At the end of the day, when you're in a community, it's Tacoma. We live in Tacoma, so it can be anyone else's fault, but we're going to have to come up with a solution and call into question those who are supposed to be helping us. And so for me, knowing who's at the stabilization site, whether they're veterans who find themselves homeless, wonderful. We should be able to plug you into the federal programs that are there to make sure veterans do not have to be homeless. If you're mentally ill, which I find the numbers suggest that somewhere in the magnitude of 25 to 35% of the people that are on the streets are some form of spectrum of mental illness. I don't think we have any mental illness or mental health departments in the city of Tacoma. Do we?
In the
I don't
city
think so.
Organization.
Yeah.
No.
So,
it's a state
but we do at the state
function,
level,
right?
And so it's saying here is who finds themselves on the streets of our city.
Yeah.
You have programs that are supposed to be addressing them, and then hold those agencies and that part of our government to account for it.
Yeah.
And so that is, in my mind, what the stabilization site, in its most perfect sense, was supposed to do, is just say, here's this 90 people. Where do you fit into this, and how can we help you? And now the goal, in my opinion, is to figure out how to expand that throughout our community, because I think we have somewhere in the magnitude of 1,000 to 1,500 people at any given time that find themselves on the streets of Tacoma.
Yeah.
And I would argue those numbers probably bear out, as I said before, 25 some odd % of them are probably mentally ill, and we need to figure out how to get them into the right programs. There's probably 10 or 15% of them who are bad actors hanging out amongst a population that we need to provide the right type of tools to our law enforcement officials to make sure that they are segregated from the group of people who are mentally ill. And then finally, you have people who are truly homeless for any number of reasons. And I would argue that the combination of those three together is not very good for any of them, but specifically bad for those who are mentally ill and homeless. And right now, we're still tinkering with how do you segregate those populations and address them in an effective manner. And I've said this numerous times, and I'm very passionate about it because I think it's a problem that can be resolved, because I literally lived on a ship for 2 years where there was 3,500 people on the ship, and I knew at least 2,000 of them by their first and last name, knew some of their families. So 1,000 to 1,500 people is not unmanageable.
Yeah.
But it needs to be treated in the fashion that I just said. And our stabilization site gets us down that road. Because we, unlike any other city in our state, and probably one of the only cities in the nation that said, we're going to take this group, figure out what this group looks like, and figure out how to address it. And we've placed, we only have 90 beds at any given time, but we've placed, I think now, probably over 100 people that have gone through that, who've been put in one place or another, be it towards stable housing, towards mental health services. And so I think we're on the cusp of something great. We just need to keep pushing and really have a conversation with our community that, when you throw it out there, people get nervous. They're like, well, you're trying to be too harsh on people that are on the streets. I said, well, no. Think of it, flip that. We don't want people to be on the streets of Tacoma.
Right.
The citizens of Tacoma don't want people to be on the streets of Tacoma. So let's go figure out who they are, pull them off the streets, cue them in the places they need to go, and help them.
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes, as you saw in some of our meetings, people come to and they're like, well, people should be able to sleep in parks. And it's like, well, no. I think people have a good idea of what parks are. I think there's a connotation that comes when people think about parks, and mixing that with a social challenge that we're having in our community, to me, seems like a cop-out. And I think we can do better. And I don't. Anybody that finds themselves that living on the streets of any city, much less ours, I don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, you're good to sleep in the park. That's fine. I'm good. We've gotten as far as we need to on this issue. And I don't even think it's a step towards where we need to go. I think we need to bring all these people in, figure out where we're going to work with our partners, be it at the federal, state level, to figure out what programs, and go advocate to plus those programs up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our stabilization site actually has been held up as a successful example across the state, because one of the things that we've learned is every individual, you touched on this, everybody that comes in there, it's a different story about how they got there and how to get them out of the situation. So what services work and what support works for one person is going to be a whole different batch for the other person. So you do touch on that theme too, of bringing in the partners. We don't, in the city of Tacoma, have a mental health program or focus or office, but the state does.
Yeah.
And so bringing in those different partners, I think actually you also touched on this, the encampments that we used to have under the freeway. We were able to work with WSDOT to get them to clean those out, hold them accountable, as you were saying, and then also in this last state budget, get some money for maintenance under the highways so that we don't see people continuing to come back in. And your background, having worked at the federal level, having worked at the state level, I think puts you in a great position to continue to build those partnerships. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely, having done that for a long time, I understand their proper, buckets of resources is what we call it, working in legislative stuff. So to seek a resolution from the wrong court, if you will, doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you came to the city of Tacoma to figure out what we could be doing to support you in mental health, it would be things that would queue you up to these other things. So yeah, I mean, WSDOT was a good example. I mean, I just figured out who had jurisdiction underneath the 705 and said, well, then it would appear that this is your problem, but here's what we're willing to do to have you help us address your problem.
Fantastic.
And so hopefully we'll continue to do that.
Well, Council Member, we have run out of time. I want to thank you very much for the work that you're doing, both on you've talked so much about working with those who are unhoused and homeless, and then with the businesses that you work with and the investment that you try and do with an attention to the region. So thank you very much for being with me. My guest today has been City Council Member Robert Thoms. I'm Elisa O'Hanlon. Thank you for tuning in to Inside Tacoma.